Thank you, Whittaker. What an excellent choice for this morning's topic. We're going to be revolving around the theme this morning of the tree of life and our seventh principle, the interconnectedness of all things. Whittaker's song was "Our World is One World." Great job in interpreting that song so well this morning, Whittaker. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Columbus. We're an inclusive spiritual community of people who support each other in their personal searches for truth and meaning. I'm Ron Ussery, your volunteer service leader today. I'm also your speaker today. My topic later on will be Darwin's Bulldog and the Science Revolution. Today's reading is by Danielle Neale, and Whittaker Locke, of course, will offer more music as well. We have some announcements, beginning with a shout out to our Zoom audience. Addressing our Zoom audience, if you don't want to be on the YouTube video that results from a Zoom recording, then you should mute your video, stop your video now, and you'll drop out. Otherwise, you can stay on there and you might be on YouTube. I know that two of our Zoom audience are Hal and Michelle Majette, who are visiting their daughter. They have a birthday in their daughter's family and their granddaughter, so happy birthday to her this morning. We missed Hal this morning in our setup. You know, there's actually quite a bit to setting up outdoors, not just chairs and tents and things, but the equipment. Of course, obviously it doesn't sit out here, you know, the whole week. So there's quite a bit of setup involved, and we appreciate all the help that we had. But usually Hal is the first one to get here, and so we missed his setting up. I did notice that in setting up, you can see that the umbrellas are strategically produced to protect our important assets. There's not one here at the podium, so I'm not sure what that means, but I guess I would agree with that as well. It's time for our announcements. We do have the following announcements this morning. Next week, Rick Spradling will be speaking, Getting to Know the Stranger Within. And we are, again, planning at this point on having an outdoor service, but of course that is weather dependent. You know, the long-range forecast called for rain this morning for the last 2 weeks, and it's bright sunshine. I didn't even bring a hat. I pulled one out of my trunk this morning. It's not really appropriate, but it's pretty bright standing here facing you folks. So we are planning on having an outdoor service, probably in the garden. We wanted to have this one in the garden, but we have to have a run-through the day or two before, and the weather wouldn't let us do that run-through, so we weren't able to move to the garden this time. I'm looking forward to having a service in that beautiful garden that Hal and Orm and others worked so hard on. But again, Saturday around noontime, we'll send out an email to everyone who might be interested in coming as to whether we're going to have the service outdoors, or if the weather looks too bad, we'll just do a Zoom service and we can all tune in from our homes, except for the technical crew who are very busily working, and I guess you may be from your homes too next Saturday, depending on the weather. I have a few announcements here. Let's see. There's a shred day at Columbus Tech next Saturday, 8:30 to 11 a.m., and everyone's invited to bring, I think the limit is 5 bags of shredding. Yes, Brenda, 3 bags. 3 bags of shredding to the Columbus Tech next Saturday morning. And on April the 22nd, which is a Thursday, I believe, it is Earth Day. Trees Columbus is celebrating Earth Day that evening on April 22nd from 7 to 8:30 p.m. with a virtual streaming with a virtual conference of wild and scenic films. So for more information, Google Earth Day in Columbus, Georgia, and you'll get an opportunity. I think this is a fundraiser, so I don't think it's free, but your money would be well spent if you want to contribute to that worthwhile effort. Are there any other announcements of a non-political nature? You're welcome to come up here and use the microphone.
All the people who have been donating coats for Paz Amigos, we don't need coats anymore because the weather's turned warm. But if you keep up with that group, you'll see there have been releases of anywhere from 8 to 15 people from the ICE detention center almost every day.
Wow.
So that is a good thing. administration changing has allowed a lot of people to be released who've been held for a long time. So
Great.
no more coats.
Great. I know that President Biden had made some comments, I think during the campaign, that he was not in favor of for-profit prisons. So hopefully that may send an omen for the closing of that facility in Lumpkin.
The homeless resource network also doesn't need a lot of winter stuff these days, but they do need things like deodorant, underwear, socks, soap, and anything like that that appears in the box out front on the porch will be going to them.
Great.
And I have totally lost count of the amount of blankets and things that this fellowship has donated this past winter. Literally, it was enough to completely fill the back of my Prius. And if any of you are familiar with a Prius, that's a heck of a lot of stuff because the back seats fold down and the storage capacity of a Prius then goes basically from the back bumper right to the back of the front seats. So I'm very, very proud of you folks for helping people who desperately need the help. So anything you can do in the way, like I said, of soap, deodorants, underwear, socks, tarps, of course, because it rains all year round, is greatly appreciated. Thanks again.
Bill?
I just want to expand on what Judy Barnett said. Paz Amigos, obviously we don't need coats, but we even had one night where they released 30 men at once. And there is a definite change in the Biden administration, and they are really emptying out. And Paz Amigos can really use cash is the most useful thing right now, and it's pazamigos.org is the website. So and thanks Judy for all you're doing to help. And this fellowship is one of the major contributors. And Ron, is it still okay to send money to you?
Yes.
And we can donate either through the fellowship or directly to Paz Amigos. Thank you.
Great. That's a great reminder. You can choose to contribute directly to Paz Amigos or to our other partner, continuing partner, Feeding the Valley, or you can contribute through us. You can, in your donation to UUFC, just designate whether it's a check or whether it's bill pay or whether it's PayPal, with more instructions to follow a little bit later in the program. You can designate that you want that to go to one of those places. Or David, for example, I'll pick on you. David sends one check from his PayPal account, and he has a notation that says this much of this should go to Feeding the Valley. So I can divide that out too. If it's more convenient for you to do it that way, we'll be happy to do it that way. Jackie from Massachusetts, where's Jackie? Jackie's back in the back. Jackie's been on Zoom with us several times. She is moving from Western Massachusetts to Columbus, beginning in June, I think, right? And Jackie's looking for a one-bedroom apartment. If anybody has any ideas, any leads, please reach out to Jackie. She'd like to have any help she can get in that regard. Yeah.
We also have Kelsey, who's visiting for the first time.
Thank you. Kelsey?
Husband's military, correct, and she's new to Columbus.
Great. Welcome, Kelsey.
Ron, we couldn't hear that since they didn't use the microphone. Could you repeat that?
Repeat what?
What she just said.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, I have my microphone. We have Kelsey, who's visiting with us for the first time.
Yes.
Her husband's in the military.
Yes.
And of course, these days you never know. It could be the wife that's in the military, and the husband could be the stay-at-home person. But in this case, that's not the case. Visiting for the first time, so we welcome her very much. Any other announcements? Okay, great. So we start our services by lighting the chalice, which symbolizes reason, tolerance, and freedom, and also justice, compassion, and love. It may not stay lit, but we'll try. Now I think you may have a handout, a little colorful card showing our 7 principles. Let's affirm the 7 principles that sum up the core values of Unitarian Universalism. Please read them aloud with me. Number 1, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Number 2, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Thirdly, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. Fourth, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Fifth, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. Sixth, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And 7, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. And that brings us to one of my favorite aspects of our service, our joys and concerns. This is how we proclaim the vitality of our fellowship, through sharing brief and personal joys and concerns. Please note this is not a time for announcements or commercials or politics. Rather, it's a time to share what's important in our own lives. I'll start by lighting a candle for sorrows and concerns you might not want to share in public. And we'd invite you to come up to the microphone if you'd like to share with us.
Well, my biggest concern, and I'm trying not to worry about it, but yeah, I've been around for a few decades, and I tell you, I have never seen this country just have so much corruption and political bitterness and whatever. It's really painful, and it's like families are breaking apart because of the different concepts, and some of them are beyond my. I don't want people to believe it. But I think this country really needs our prayers and positive thoughts.
Amen. Anyone else? David, Elise, do you see anybody out there on the Zoom audience that would like to share anything?
Don't see anybody.
Okay. Now let's move on to our celebration of life toast. If you don't have anything to drink, we can use our imaginary toast. Of course, inside the fellowship, and we return inside, which I'm hoping is going to be sometime this summer, we'll actually pass out juice or wine, and we'll have real cups. But for the meantime, you can pretend. Our celebration of life toast is unique to this fellowship, and we do it a little bit differently than before. You can join in with your cup of coffee or another beverage. Our toast carries no doctrinal symbolism. It's not a sacrament. It's simply a warm tradition, and we invite you to share it with us. Please lift your cups, and I'll read the toast written by our own Ed Wilson, and we'll all join together on the last line. We celebrate life with its beauty and its pain. We lift these cups in tribute to the achievements of human minds and hands, and in sensitivity to the frustrations of misfortune and heartache, not fixing blame or credit for the outcome of chance, sensing the risk, savoring the joy, sharing it all. Knowing of the certainty of death and remembering the value of each moment, we drink our toast of celebration to this time, to the future, to each other, to the throbbing of the earth and sea and sky with life. Together, we drink this toast in celebration of life. This morning's offering will now be given and received in the spirit of grateful fellowship. You can mail your offering to UUFC at P.O. Box 698, Fortson, Georgia 31808, or use PayPal. You can hit send money and put as the recipient our email address, uufcga@gmail.com. While you look for your checkbook or sign into PayPal at home, Whittaker will play George Gershwin's Prelude No. 1. And now we have a reading from Danielle Neale, coming to us from Pennsylvania. I guess she's in Pennsylvania today, isn't she?
I have chosen a short quote today by Charles Darwin from The Descent of Man, which I believe highlights UU's seventh principle. Man, with all his notable qualities, with sympathy which feels for the most debased, with benevolence which extends not only to other men, but to the humblest living creature, with his godlike intellect which has penetrated into the movements and constitution of the solar system, with all these exalted powers, man still bears in his bodily frame the indelible stamp of his lowly origin. Thank you for letting me spend Sunday with you, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.
Now for our regular Sunday service talk, and I am your speaker today. I've been a member of UUFC since the year 2001. I retired from working as a school librarian and teacher in 2018. And I'm currently serving my second term as your UU treasurer, and I serve on the board for this fellowship. So you can see that I believe in the mission of UUFC, the mission in this community and in the nation. When Bill Harlan approached me a few weeks ago and asked me what I wanted to present on next, I told him that I had been thinking about a program, and that the program I had in mind would embody the seventh principle, the one about the interconnectedness of all living things. My topic would embody this principle better than anything possibly could. And Bill said, whoa, that's a tall order. But when you think about it, what else could embody the interconnectedness of all living things other than Charles Darwin and the theory of evolution and the broad tree of life that he unveiled for us? I'll tell you a little bit more about Darwin that you may not know unless you're a real student of Darwin, but I'll also tell you a good bit more about Thomas Huxley, who was a protege of Darwin. I see Pat nodding her head. I didn't know of Thomas Huxley until I attended a summer class at Oxford University several years ago, and had an opportunity to take a wonderful course, a life-changing course that I wish all of you could take. It was entitled The History of Scientific Imagination. And it was taught by a wonderful instructor whose last name I forget, but his first name was Willem. He was of Dutch descent. And Willem had recently retired as the director of the Museum of Science at Oxford. He was a wonderful teacher. And he taught us the history of scientific imagination through interpretation of classical art. You might think that's strange, but when you think about the written record going back to basically the current era, the beginning of the current era, there's not a lot of recording that's reliable as far as particularly in the way that society reacted to scientific developments. But when you examine classical art, particularly the chosen pieces that we looked at, you can really begin to see how that art shows us the reaction of a society to new developments in science. As one example, look at, and I'm talking about art broadly, not only just the visual arts, but the written arts as well. And I think Connie mentioned recently in a UU group, Frankenstein. You know, Frankenstein was written at a time when electricity had just been invented. And electricity was just begun to be distributed. And a lot of people feared it. It brings a little bit to mind this vaccination fear we have right now. When electricity first began, people were wondering, gee, will it give me cancer? Will it give me the vapors or what have you? And they wondered, you know, it was discussed at the time that life itself depends on electrical systems as well as other systems of the body. And there was real concern that this could really upset the apple cart. And when you think about Frankenstein the monster, this monster embodied society's reaction to this new scientific development. I think it's safe to say at this point that those fears for electricity were largely unfounded in terms of its interruption of our body's systems, but that was the kind of thing we talked about in this class. Well, I learned about Thomas Huxley in this class, and I learned a lot more about Darwin than I knew in this class. So I'll tell you a bit about what I learned. Prior to Darwin, and Willem characterized the time of Darwin the time of publication, actually, of Darwin's seminal book, his book of 1859, Willem said that you can divide history in terms of pre-Darwin and post-Darwin. And he said that in pre-Darwin times, education and the church were two sides of the same coin. And the church, at least in Western society, controlled education. And the church controlled science. Think about what we know about Galileo and his run-ins with the church. Although Galileo said throughout his life he was a faithful Christian, nonetheless, his teachings, his scientific discoveries upset the apple cart in terms of conflicting with what the Bible teaches as the earth being the center of the universe and the sun and the stars revolving around the earth. When Galileo dared to present his evidence that that's not exactly correct, Galileo was excommunicated and he was subjected to house arrest. So this was the time. This was the idea of the time as far as the church dominating education up until Darwin's time. Willem told us about the publication of Darwin's book in 1859 and the subsequent reaction by the church. The church reacted quite violently to the idea, although in this book Darwin barely mentions man at all. Darwin confines himself in his first book. He later expanded, he later wrote The Descent of Man, in which he carried forward this thinking into our species. But in the first book, he was very careful not to push too much initially, and he talked about the evolution of species and the creation of new species through natural selection. But the people who read this book in '59 understood that this whole approach would also apply to humankind, and many were up in arms about it. Basically, the theory of evolution proposed by Darwin it runs against the church's teachings in that the church, at least pre-Darwin, the church recognized that God created the various species. Species are fixed, and that there's a bird and there's a dinosaur, and those things don't evolve from one to the other. That would be playing God. Interestingly, it was Thomas Huxley, the real focus of my talk in a moment here, who proved that birds are the antecedents of dinosaurs. He was the one who came up with that research. And he's also known for a lot of other things, even though you may not have ever heard his name, at least not very much. But the reaction by the church was pretty powerful upon this publication. And the Bishop of Oxford, and here I am sitting in Oxford at the time learning this, the Bishop of Oxford, named Sam Wilberforce, had the nickname of Soapy Sam, and the Bishop of Oxford challenged Darwin to a debate at Oxford. Well, Darwin did not like the spotlight. Darwin was a man of science. Darwin, by the way, was a Unitarian. His picture hangs in this poster on the wall near our handicapped entrance as a Unitarian Universalist. But as with several others on that poster, we have a liberty. Darwin was a Unitarian. He was not a Unitarian Universalist, of course. UU didn't exist at that time. And Unitarian in Great Britain is a Christian denomination, particularly in the 19th century. It was quite Christian. Darwin was actually slated to become a Unitarian minister until biology and science lit his passion, and he devoted his life in that direction. But Darwin did not seek the spotlight. He actually deferred publishing his findings. He went aboard. He went around the world cruise aboard the HMS Beagle. It took 21 years after his 5-year voyage ended. It took 21 years between the time of his voyage ending, when he did this research, and the publication of his book. So he was not hurrying to present his findings to the world, partly because he knew what kind of reaction there would be to his findings and how that would affect his family. So when Soapy Sam, the Bishop of Oxfordshire, challenged Darwin to a debate, Darwin declined. He wasn't interested. But his protege, Thomas Huxley, who was actually 15 years younger than Darwin, Thomas Huxley said, "I'll do it. I'll be your advocate." So later, Huxley became well known as Darwin's Bulldog. He was the face of Darwin to the public. He was the man arguing forcefully for Darwin's ideas. Even though Huxley initially rejected Darwin's ideas, when Huxley and Darwin first met at the Royal Academy of Science in London, Huxley said that, I don't see the evidence for your theory, Charles. But Charles took it, he liked Huxley, he liked Huxley's intelligence and his fire, so he took it upon himself, a special project to convince Huxley that he did have the evidence, and Huxley did come along and became his most vocal opponent. Darwin and Huxley had a lot in common, but they also were nearly opposite in some ways. As I mentioned, Darwin was a Unitarian. He was a lifelong Unitarian, and at one point wanted to be a preacher. Huxley was a non-believer. It is Huxley who coined the term agnostic, or agnostic, as we pronounce it today. Huxley came up with that term and published that idea, which of course was revolutionary on itself. Darwin came from wealth. Huxley's father was broke and penniless. Huxley dropped out of public school after 2 years of education because his father lost his job. The school where Huxley's father taught math closed, and the family was struggling financially ever since then. So Huxley had 2 years of formal education as a child. They both sailed, I said, around the world, but Huxley joined the Royal Navy and sailed to the Southern Hemisphere. Charles did not join the Navy. He was advised that he would have more control of his time and efforts if he went aboard the Beagle as a civilian. So he didn't need the money. So he went on this 5-year round-the-world voyage as a non-paid, non-official Navy person. Of course, Darwin published with co-author Alfred Russel Wallace his compelling account of evolution and the formation of new species based on a great number of specimens collected by Darwin on his round-the-world voyage. Darwin collected all kinds of things. The most famous collection was dealt with the finches that Darwin collected in the Galapagos region. And Darwin actually didn't even realize that these various birds, various appearing birds from the various islands around the Galapagos were finches. They were all finches until his specimens were analyzed quite a bit. But he theorized, after going through laboriously all his specimens, that that these various branches of finches adapted specifically to the weather, to the diet, to the food available in their particular areas. And Darwin said that when an individual of a population changes to an extent that those changes make him more likely to reproduce successfully, and those changes are heritable, then that is a new species. And that therefore, one might say God didn't create that new species. Everything else created it. Just the environment created it. So that individuals of a mutant characteristic become populations of a species. And if you apply that notion of speciation across the scale of geological time, it's not such a reach to contemplate a common ancestor for all land animals, or even an original spark of life. So you can see that the tree of life is expressed for the first time in human history in Darwin's book, as promoted very enthusiastically and vocally by Thomas Huxley. Huxley's also famous for one other thing. The name Huxley might ring a bell with you, but you may be thinking erroneously of Aldous Huxley. Aldous Huxley was the grandson of Thomas Huxley. And Aldous published in 1932, The Brave New World. And let me find a little bit here about Brave New World. In Brave New World, Aldous Huxley wrote about a dystopian view. And if you think about the early 30s, what a time to write about a dystopia, right? When it looks like our society is just crashing around you. And Aldous Huxley wrote about an era, a futuristic dystopia where individuals are first of all, sex is outlawed. Reproduction is carefully controlled in the laboratory in Aldous Huxley's world. And the idea that after Charles Darwin passed became known as social Darwinism, which of course has been completely disproven these days, but social Darwinism was the notion that people are naturally inclined for the path that they wind up embracing. So the person who is incarcerated at Lumpkin, for example, in the ICE prison there, according to social Darwinism, which of course has been discredited, that person not only deserves that fate, but they're naturally directed to be an immigrant and looking desperately for work. That's their destiny. And there's no point in fighting against it. Accept it, social Darwinism. So in the book, Huxley writes that the lower caste, and Huxley says in the book that you have to have lower caste in order to enable there being upper caste. And in the book, lower caste are engineered in the laboratory by depriving the fetuses of oxygen. So you lower their intelligence, condemning them to a lower caste society. In the book, finally, last thing I'll say is that everyone is conditioned to accept your lot, accept your fate, and don't fight against it. Excuse me. The great debate at Oxford in 1860 between Soapy Sam and Thomas Huxley was characterized as pretty much a stomping of the church by Huxley. Huxley came armed with all sorts of scientific studies, with testimonies by the leading scientific minds of his time from all over Europe, and Soapy Sam came armed with the Holy Bible. Willem, my instructor, said that after this debate, there was an agreement between religion and science. And religion said to science, okay, you go your way, and we, the church, will go our way. We will confine ourselves to matters of faith, and you can have this whole science thing. Whereupon I raised my hand in our class, and I said, sir, I don't think you've been to the American South. We haven't gotten to that crossroads yet, where religion and science have shaken hands and parted ways. It's not been that clean here. But let me read just a few of the quotes that Huxley said during that great debate. He said, "The great tragedy of science is the slaying of a beautiful hypothesis by an ugly fact." He also said, "The man of science has learned to believe in justification, not by faith, but by verification." Another gem from the debate was, "Science is simply common sense at its best, that is rigidly accurate in observation and merciless to fallacy in logic." Another Huxley noteworthy quote which came later was, "I have no faith, very little hope, and as much charity as I can afford." Connie's given me a signal that I don't have time for my next 3 pages of notes, which is fine with me, so I'll cut to my conclusion. In conclusion, the common thread running through this presentation has been the struggle between religion and science, as the struggle played out on the evolving contemporary society. Willem taught his class that education and religion had been very closely intertwined for virtually all of human history until very recent times. And as a man of science, he heralded the liberation of learning and the wresting away from religion, the control of what would be taught and how. One of the things I cut out, by the way, I'll interject very quickly, is that Huxley, one of his great contributions to society was he served on the London Board of Education for like 30 years. And he transformed the way science would be taught in schools and really the way the whole curriculum was designed. Darwin's role in this struggle between the church and religion is momentous, but it might not have been without the fierce advocacy of his bulldog, Huxley. Thank you. And a reminder that we'll have time for any discussion, any questions and answers, or any comments after the conclusion of our tape portion of our video. So we extinguish the chalice here that it might glow gently in our hearts. May it light your path as you leave this place. And I see the wind's done that for us already. Would everyone please rise in body or spirit for our closing words? With unity of spirit, we go our ways in universal fellowship until we meet again. And now Whittaker will play us home. He'll be playing hymn number 194 from our UU hymn book entitled Faith is a Forest. You may be seated if you like. First, let me just share with you a couple of the lines from this hymn. Faith is a forest in which doubts play and hide. Web of life, to this thread I weave. Whittaker?